6 passing, I ventured out to Amanda Park, Washington, so I can leave some flowers, pay my respects, and reflect on his case. Hey, Lyle. We just arrived. It's about midnight, and it was definitely interesting driving out here. It took a few hours, and it was raining for most of that, and I feel like as we got closer, the rain was definitely getting a lot worse, so it was becoming more challenging, and it's also pretty late at night, so it definitely seemed like a longer drive, and I'm pretty tired. I mean, I left pretty much straight from work to, drive out here. It's kind of weird being here. I didn't really have a plan for once I got here. I'm so tired, but I just can't get comfortable. It's weird. Like, I have this just like uneasy feeling, I guess, and I don't know if that's like, my own anxiety, or, feeling like this might be like kitschy or disrespectful in some way, and it certainly wasn't intended to be, but I don't know. I feel a little weird being here, and I knew that if I was going to make the drive out here, that I would want to stay for the night, because I just wouldn't have the energy to do that drive and back in the same day, even though the room is really nice, actually, and the bed is comfortable, and I have Sweetie here, and it just feels weird being here. I ended up getting assigned room number 7, which was actually one of the rooms that Lyle had stayed in. I didn't ask for a specific room. I thought that might be weird if I would ask for like number 5 or number 7. So it was interesting that I was given number 7 randomly, but I did think it'd be interesting to just like leave it in the universe's hands. First room, number 7, he, I guess, complained about the noise. There's some kind of like RV park, or at least there used to be, right behind this room, so he had complained about noise and that he wasn't able to sleep. So he asked to be moved to another room, so they moved him to room number 5 for the rest of his stay, and that was ultimately where they had found him. The idea of being in that same room just kind of scared me a little bit, and especially like being on the anniversary of that seemed like disrespectful. But it is interesting to think that like 20 years ago he was here in this room. Well, actually, he might have been in the other room by now. No, I tend to put a bit of weight into things like that when, certain pieces fall into place. It makes me feel like it's like a nod from the universe that I'm doing the right thing, or that I'm on the right path. I think it would be interesting to at least have some sort of shared experience in that. I wanted to pay my respects and honor Lyle in some sort of way that would be respectful and meaningful, and would be able to give me some perspective on this case, and honoring his memory, even though I don't really know him. I don't know anything about him. Most people don't even know his name. I brought flowers. I thought that might be a nice touch. I brought some for the room, and I brought some to scatter somewhere. I think about this case a lot. I heard about it a couple of years ago, which is, well after everything had happened, and actually to the point where he had been identified by the time I had heard about it. So this is like, a good 15 years late. But ever since I heard about it, I was just like so taken by that case, and I see some of myself in him, in the fact that, like, I've gone through certain, dark phases in my life, and I've definitely considered things. I'm somebody that has struggled with anxiety and depression for most of my adult life, and there have definitely been times, especially when everything was just going wrong and I just felt beaten down by life. I I have to feel optimistic. I choose to be optimistic, but that's really, really difficult, and I can't let it win. You know what I mean? Like, I'm too stubborn. It's really hard to talk yourself out of it, and realizing that, I think, gives me some perspective that somebody who's never had that thought cross their mind might not. One of the reasons why Lyle's case really resonates with me is that there are these things that show he was such a gentle soul, and he showed a level of consideration for others that I, I relate to. When people talk about someone who decides to take their own life, they often call them selfish. They often don't understand what it's like to feel like that's your only option. And I wish that there was more of a healthy conversation around it where people wouldn't fear being, like, institutionalized if they talked about having a fleeting thought of something like that. The way I see it is the human brain is this, like, beautiful, complex supercomputer that is exceptionally good at problem solving. And what people fail to realize is when you're in a mental space like that, where you feel so isolated, where you feel so wrapped up in, things that you're going through, that it feels insufferable, it could be hard to not feel like that is the solution to what you're going through, right? In a lot of ways, that is the ultimate end to a long line of trauma and struggle for people. But that's the thing. It is the end. And you don't get to see it play out. You don't see it get better. It just ends. And that is one of the things that usually has changed my mind on it, is a ever-growing optimism that I have in life, where I want to see it through. I want to see it get better. Sometimes when people are in that state of mind, they can't see the part where it gets better. And that is such a heartbreaking thing. And when I think about Lyle's case, to see that suffering and that pain and that trauma that he must have been dealing with, and for him to have thought it's not going to get better, or to be in a tiny town in the middle of nowhere and to think nobody knows who I am, nobody knows where I am, no one's going to miss me. Part of just wanted to, like, compose myself a little bit before I kept going, but sometimes when you're in the throes of depression, or experiencing a tremendous amount of pain or processing trauma, there can be those moments where it feels overwhelming, or like that it's not getting better, or you're not making the impact that you want. But you have to understand that mental illness isn't rational. It certainly isn't kind. And it will lie to you and make you feel like you're the only person that's dealing with these things. Lyle's case really resonated with me and continues to, is because I understand some level of that pain that he must have been going through. In those moments, it's really hard to pull through, and sometimes it's hard to just like exist. And especially with the way things are right now, I mean, it's a pandemic right now, but that also means that mental health is suffering, and it is suffering greatly. When I think about how the world is today and draw comparisons to how the world was 20 years ago, there's a lot of overlap. You know, there was a lot of uncertainty, there was a lot of chaos happening, plenty of xenophobia, and you have people that are seeing it as the beginning of the end. And when you have all those things happening and there's a lack of leadership, there's a lack of reassurance, there's an uncertainty, and then you add things like personal or emotional problems and mental health issues, that is just a recipe for disaster, and mental health always suffers. It's hard to look past how things are now and to feel optimistic when so many things are going wrong. It's hard not to feel totally consumed and overwhelmed. I can understand why somebody would get to that state of mind, but it still breaks my heart when people aren't able to push past those negative thoughts and they get wrapped up in how things are now, and they're not able to see how things might be later. But that's really, really difficult, and I'll admit there have been times where I almost wasn't able to do it. It's okay to not feel okay. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to find support when you need it. And that is a really hard thing to ask of somebody who may not have a strong support network or have access to the tools that they need to properly address and take care of their mental health. Mental illness is so good at lying to you and making you feel like you're all alone and that you don't matter, and just, it's not true. You matter. You make a difference. If there's someone out there who is feeling like they don't matter, or that the connections that they make in their life aren't making an impact, I hope this can provide a small piece of reassurance. I don't know Lyle, and I'll likely never really know Lyle, even if his name is publicly released. If his family ever decides that they would like to do that, that is entirely up to them, of course. But if he's ever publicly identified, if we ever get more information, for one, I would love to know more about him and get more perspective, and I think that could provide a lot of closure to a lot of people. That might not ever happen, but I don't know him. He is a perfect stranger to me, and I think about him all the time. I think about his case all the time. I think about his impact that he's had on so many people all the time. People that didn't even know his real name. And so many people came together to try and get him his name back and try to provide closure to a family or community that he left behind. It's such a beautiful thing to come out of such a horrible, horrible thing. And I would hate for somebody to repeat that, to feel like they don't matter, to feel like, if they went, it wouldn't make a difference. I promise you it would. A perfect stranger has made such an impact on my life and has helped give me a perspective that I may not have ever had. So when you think about the personal connections you have in your life, your friends, your family, strangers, and you think about all those lives that you touch, even if it's just for a moment, you might not see it right now, you might not see it for a long time, but the moments that you share with people have a tremendous impact on your life and on theirs. And even in the small moments, you can do something that changes someone's life forever. And that can be in a good way, that could be in a bad way. And they'll remember you. I remember acts of kindness that were seemingly insignificant at the time that I still think about to this day. And I don't know those people. They were absolute strangers. I think of small things that people in my life have said to me that made a huge impact later, and sometimes they can be life changing. People will always miss you, people will always think of you, and even if your mental illness or the circumstances of your life make you feel like things don't matter, I promise you they do. Everybody that you've ever met, and even if it was for a brief moment, you made an impact and you will continue to make an impact. Every day that you choose to fight and be here and survive is courageous, and people don't really give credit for just being here, right? Like, I know people always say, like, oh, you millennials and your participation trophies. Honestly, it's so hard. Unnecessarily, I might add. But there are days where it's just hard to get out of bed. And that should count, you know? Even if you're just here and trying your best, that's okay. Every day that you choose to be here, every day that you choose to fight, especially with debilitating mental illness, is a win. I know it's too late. 2 decades too late, in fact, but if he's floating out there in the universe, I hope he knows that he's not alone, and people are still thinking of him, and that his life made an impact. And it's so heartbreaking to think that in his last moments here, that he might have been thinking that he didn't matter, or that he wouldn't make an impact, or that he hadn't made an impact. I can't imagine what pain or trauma that he was going through, or what mental space he was in. He still mattered, and he still makes an impact even if we never truly know him. I hope one day, if his family feels comfortable, that they will give us some context and that we'll better understand him. But if they don't, I'll respect that. I'm not gonna seek out that information. But I hope one day his family feels comfortable, and that they've had time to process everything and to have some closure before they open that door, if they ever do. If they do ever see this, I hope they also know that people cared about Lyle, or whatever his real name is, and people think of him. And my heart breaks for their loss as well. I know there have been people who have tried to publicly identify Lyle. We may or may not ever get the confirmation that this name that has been thrown out there and the stories surrounding that are actually Lyle. His family has decided that they didn't want to publicly identify him, and part of me feels like they are honoring and respecting Lyle's wishes in remaining anonymous, and I respect them for that. There is also, a lot of harassment that comes from being identified when it comes to John or Jane Doe cases, where the family will get harassed and, asked why they didn't look for the person, why they didn't put them in NamUs, why they didn't follow the proper steps. I can understand why Lyle's family has decided to keep him anonymous and to remain anonymous themselves. I know there was a ton of interest surrounding this case, and it was years of dedication for people to try to get his name back, and he got his name back, and his family knows who he is and what happened to him, and that's really all that matters. I know that people feel emotionally invested in Lyle's case. I do feel a investment and an interest in his case that, as a stranger, I don't really have a right to. People tend to forget when it comes to these cases that these are real people, and in honoring their wishes, sometimes we have to take a step back. Obviously, there are people who dedicated hours and hours of time trying to solve this case, and they may feel entitled to know who he is. We don't have a right to that information. Even if you have that emotional investment, it doesn't mean that outweighs his wishes or his family's wishes. And while I am appreciative that some information is out there, we don't know if that's really Lyle. It took years, decades, for him to be identified, and he finally got his name back, but he went to great lengths to protect that, and I respect his family for respecting his wishes in that, especially because he was only identified well after his passing, and there are some ethical questions in if that was the right thing to do. If it's somebody's wish that they don't want to be identified, and eventually they are, right? There are some questions on if that's the right move. But when it comes to cases like this, it's not just about the person who passed, it's also about their families and their communities that they'd built around themselves. I've done a little bit of additional research, and I was able to find a name associated with his case, but that doesn't mean that is him. And the family wants to maintain his privacy, which I respect, and I respect their privacy, so I would never publish his name. I wanted to leave some flowers for Lyle. The cemetery where he was originally buried had a plot for him initially, but when they had exhumed him to identify him, they eventually cremated him to return him to his family, so there isn't a plot there for him anymore. Otherwise, I would leave flowers there. I'm also going to venture out and scatter some flowers, somewhere pretty out here. I wanted to display these a little nicer and put them in a vase so they would stay nice and fresh and pretty, but I left a note here as well where I just talked briefly about my experience. I have quite a variety of flowers here, some daisies, carnations, I think some mums, but I was most excited about these marigolds. I know that they have a lot of significance in a few different cultures, and there's a lot of really deep symbolism with them, especially when it comes to remembering the dead. So I wanted to find some of those, so I really lucked out. I got the last of the bunch, and I was really excited to find marigolds specifically, especially considering that Lyle is believed to have a Hispanic background. I really wanted to find marigolds because I knew that they had a lot of cultural significance. Obviously, we don't really know him, so there's no way to really know if that is his cultural background, but I hope that I am correct in that assumption and that this is a way to honor him. So I will be cleaning these up and bringing them somewhere outside. So the place I ended up going with was Lake Quinault. As soon as I saw it, I just knew it was so beautiful and peaceful and perfect for these flowers. So I decided to spread them out here. As you can see later on, I had mixed results. The first time went well, but they weren't quite going out as far as I wanted, so I decided to throw them back in, and you'll see. So this is when I look back to see that the flowers aren't really going into the lake, they're just kind of sitting right off the shore. So I decided to try again and actually throw them into the lake. As you can see here, Sweetie decided that she wanted to be right in the middle of the frame, so you can't actually see me throw in these flowers, but I thought a little bit of comic relief might be nice after discussing such a serious case and a serious topic, and so I left it in for you guys. Hopefully you enjoy. We explored the area a little bit more and enjoyed some more of the great outdoors of the beautiful Pacific Northwest, but it was time to check out, so we started heading back so we can pack up and then head back home. So over here is room number 7 and 8, which is separate from the other rooms across this courtyard in the parking lot. You can see over there is room number 5. So this is actually an ADA accessible room. I was curious if they were still renting it out at all, or if it wasn't rented out as often, but the front desk lady told me there was someone staying there that night, and she actually hadn't heard about Lyle's case, so I gave her a little bit of information, and we had some very interesting conversations about some weird goings on at the property. Are you ready, baby?